People join. Hi, people. Welcome everybody to this edition of the GenWise Adda on this particularly important in quotes day of Teachers' Day. It's a nice occasion to be getting together to talk about this NEP. I was looking for a quote on teachers and education that I had not seen before. And I found one interesting one by Loris Malagugi, who was behind the Reggio Emilia system from Italy. And so he said, our task regarding creativity is to help children climb their own mountains as high as possible. No one can do more. So the key, I think, there is their own mountains. That's the thing for us to sort of bear in mind. So on that note, we'll get started. We're very happy to have Meeta Sengupta here with us today. Meeta is an education strategy, policy research expert, and she's the founder of the Center for Education Strategy. It's a think tank that builds bridges between policy and practice for educators, educationists, and institutions. She works at the cusp of policy and practice across the education and skills spectrum. And she is seen a lot. She enjoys sharing her insights and thoughts and tweets and writing for a wide variety of audience. I follow her, and it's an interesting bunch of tweets there. Her writing also appears in longer form, both regularly online and in print, in leading platforms: Forbes blog, Times of India blog, Daily Pioneer, Indian Express, DNA, Hindustan Times, others. She's also a public speaker at events related to education and policy around education, like the WISE Summit that's held every couple of years in Doha, the India Today Education Enclave, and so on. So welcome, Meeta. Happy to have you on board today to talk about the NEP with the Vishnu, who is, I'm sure, well known to most people here. He's a co-founder of GenWise, and he has decades of experience both in the business and education domains. So I'll just hand it over to Vishnu with one word. That is that we will plan to go on for about an hour today in all. So we will have the conversation between Vishnu and Meeta for about 20-25 minutes, not more than 30, let's say. And then we will throw it open to questions. So people, please feel free to type in your questions on chat as and when they occur to you. This is also being streamed on Facebook Live. For your information. Yeah, over to you, Vishnu.
Yeah, thanks, Sowmya. That was a great quote from Reggio Emilia. So Meeta, good morning, and thanks so much for joining us on this 11th Adda. So
thank
really
you for
glad
having me. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks. So in some sense, taking from Sowmya's quote, the NEP 2020 seems to be about helping children or young adults climb their own mountain and trying to get out of the way where the system is not needed and enabling them where it's needed. And you've spoken elsewhere that it took 6 years in the making to come to this with a lot of consultation and collaboration. And I heard you say somewhere else that sort of the charter of demands of many different stakeholder groups have at least at the policy level, been addressed here. So this group we have here, there are a lot of teachers, educators, but there are many parents too. So if you could, and not everybody has necessarily read the NEP, or they may not even have read much in the press about it. So if you could take a few minutes to just give your high-level summary of the NEP 2020, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. I'll try my best to do that. And I know that I preach that for online learning, nobody should speak for more than 2.5 minutes. I promise I'm going to try to take 3 minutes, maybe 4 to do this, but not too long. And I'm happy to answer questions, because obviously in 3 or 4 minutes, I won't have covered all of it. I think one of the most special things about this NEP has been the consultation. I think the process of the consultation, I mean, the content of the NEP comes later, But the process of the consultation, I think, was the most special part, because for the first time, everybody went, the MHRD went down to, it was MHRD at that point of time, went down all the way to the grassroots and to ask teachers, groups of teachers, assembled as Gram Panchayats, assembled by district education officers, to bring their questions to the table. Then there were at least 2 rounds of questions in the online space, and they got lakhs and lakhs of inputs, like tens of lakhs of inputs. The huge challenge is, how do you make any sense out of all of these inputs? But they mattered, right? Because, for example, including transgender education into the NEP, and those rights are really important, came from a suggestion from the public, as acknowledged by the Secretary, MHRD. So I think all that we contribute to the policy has made a difference. And I think let's take one quick second to actually talk about what a policy is. Like you rightly said, it's a charter of demands that has, from the people, that has been accepted by the government, that says, okay, we agree that we are going to do it. So think of it a parallel, a trade union negotiation, where the trade union goes to the management and says, we need X, Y, Z, etc., so that we can work better. Here we are saying so that we can do things for students better. So the government has said, okay, these are the things that make sense as a cohesive whole. These are the things that don't clash with each other. And this is why we're going to proceed in this direction. Now that we have this direction, and that doesn't mean that the policy is perfect. That means it is something that they think that they are able to do. That they think this is a vision saying over the next 20 years, we are all going to be able to pull together in one direction. So what are we saying? But for that to happen, we are saying, okay, here are a few systemic inputs. And the NEP has 3 very important changes. One is that of choice. So they have said that across the older years, you do not actually need to stick to one stream. Another great element is that of chance. You can take your 10th and 12th board exams again and again, if you want to. If you are in higher education, you can step on and step off. If you think after the first year that this is not exactly for you, you want to take a year off to think about it, you have a problem in your family, but you don't have the funds, you can take some time off, not all the time off. So there is this challenge that they have thrown to us. The challenge is biggest in the early years, because the policy has clearly said that foundational learning has to be in mission mode. Mission mode is a technical term. It means budgets will almost automatically be allocated. Almost automatically. The process is shorter. Mission mode means that ministries will have to cooperate as a priority. So mission actually means we're going to get it done. And we're going to try to get it done before other things. So this is, so procedures will be easier for them. Early years, of course, Sowmya, you are the expert in early years. So in question answers, we'll probably discuss that further. The focus again on the child, on exploration, on discovery, on actually including year 1 and 2 in this thing is quite useful, because all class 1 and 2 teachers have said that in the first 2 years of primary school, which was class 1 and 2, all you're doing really is socializing the child to learning together in bunches of 40. So if you're only socializing the child, then that's really part of the child's growth process into a system. And it makes absolute sense to have an integrated growth process for the child. Whether we want to socialize the child or not is a whole other set of questions. But the goals for ECCE are absolutely wonderful. Teachers and administrators have been asking a question. So I'm just anticipating a question. That does it mean we have to have our administration change? Do we have to all be sitting in the same building? There is nothing in the NEP that says that. You don't have to be sitting in the same building. You just have to maintain continuity of progress for the child. And you have to have an approach to teaching and learning that extends all the way to class 2. So administratively, building wise, etc., you don't need to change anything unless your state government later on mandates that. So the policy as such will never mandate anything. we have some beautiful things happening in middle school as well. And I will add that there's so much space given to exploration, discovery, growth. In fact, so much space given in that policy that parents and teachers are worried. How are we going to do it? Because as we have realized during the COVID crisis, this is the first time we are being asked to teach to children who are not sitting in the box of a classroom. Children who are free to walk away unless we do our job well as teachers, educators, etc. And the NEP is mandating a freedom of the mind, literally. Not mandating again, suggesting freedom of the mind in middle school. And for those of us who come from a command and control system, this is quite scary to implement. Those of us who have managed 14, 15-year-olds in classrooms know that it is incredibly scary. You have to create that magic in that classroom. So yes, the NEP does come as a challenge, because from being distributors of knowledge, we are now going to become magicians. And that's hard. That's hard. But then we also know, and I'm going to pause here after this sentence, we also know that we have had magical moments in classes. We have had that perfect class. So we know it is possible.
Yeah, thanks, Meeta. I mean, I love the phrase, having to move from being distributors of knowledge to magicians in the classroom. So, so on one hand, it does look like the system is trying to reduce the amount of stress in a way by, say, providing this choice, as you said, that you can take exams multiple number of times, or streams are done away with, so you can choose the subjects you need. And but do you see this creating another kind of stress, not being used to these things? What kind of stresses might the child, the parent, the teacher, the school management face because of this?
Good stress or bad stress? We know both.
Yeah.
When it comes to the stress spectrum, there is an optimum that we need to achieve to get good performance. And we really do not want to overstress our children, our students. I correct myself. I think we fall into the trap of calling them children, whereas what we are discussing is their student role over here. So do correct me whenever I say children. And as should all of us correct ourselves. I think there is an optimum amount of stress that needs to be created in every system, and every system design has to have some element of push and pull in it for it to work well. So which is why examinations will still remain. But examinations do not necessarily need to be as high stakes as they are. I mean, I remember the sheer stress of my class 12 examination, and you people have taken the JEE, I've taken the CAT. I remember how we were completely wired up for that moment, you know, just complete, as if we are a piece of perfect music. We were just completely wired up to deliver that. And I swear I would not have done as well on the CAT if the person sitting behind me hadn't taken me for a walk. He just turned out to be a friend in the same room, taken me for a walk and joked with me for 15, 20 minutes. I was so stressed. Stress is not always productive in exams. We know that, and the NEP acknowledges that. So they've done 2 or 3 wonderful things over here. They've said, firstly, we are going to reduce the stakes of the examination. We are going to introduce, for example, there is a new voluntary examination by the National Testing Agency that hopefully the universities will be persuaded to include as admission criteria. So it's not just your 12th marks. You can also, you can substitute that with the National Testing Agency's new voluntary exam. I think, and given your background in assessments, etc., there's some more interesting things that are happening with the National Testing Agency and the structure. But there's another thing that's happening in terms of exams and questions. The NEP is strongly against rote learning. Who is the father of mathematics as a question that doesn't matter anymore? What you can do with 2 apples and 3 oranges is much more interesting. So the lateral thinking questions, the puzzles, etc., your ability to connect the dots, your ability to build something out of some knowledge you picked up in history, some knowledge that you picked up in science, something that you knew in mathematics, and your ability to actually engage your brain. I'm loath to use the term critical thinking. It's not only critical thinking. It's your ability to connect the dots and actually build a solution out of what you have learned is what they are trying to encourage in the NEP. How do they do that? They're saying the nature of the question in the board exams is going to be application oriented. They're saying that your result card, report card is going to be holistic, which means we're not going to pay attention to rote learning. Your weekly tests, your formative tests, everything has to be application based. Now, this is a change in the classroom, but this also in a way activates our entire learning process.
Yeah.
Think of the fresh new energy that can be brought into it.
Yeah, so, yeah, sorry.
Now, I just realized that I haven't answered one part of your question. Does this make it more stressful for teachers and administrators?
So
well, if you're the kind of administrator who says, I want a quiet classroom, I want discipline and no desks to move and everybody to be sitting quietly, then I'm sorry, you are in a little bit of trouble, but only till you hold on to your fears. The minute you let go of the fears and you let learning bloom, I swear, there is always order in that chaos because everybody is directed towards that goal, that learning outcome of that class. That energy is always focused.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think there has to be a certain amount of stress. I'm going to use a different word for it, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on where my question came from. So I'm going to use these two terms which come from Peter Senge. Creative tension and emotional tension. So creative tension is the positive tension you feel in the act of creation, right? So how do I do this? I don't know how to, do this. And can you suggest some techniques how we could do this? And emotional tension is, my God, what you are feeling outside that cat, center, right? So in my experience, one of the things I've seen is that while there is excitement and people looking forward to such things, there is also a certain degree of nervousness. I'll take a couple of examples. So for example, a decade ago when I was at Educational Initiatives and Gujarat state had approached us for board exam reform, and a lot of good work was done, and but it took almost 2-3 years for them to put even 5 or 10% of the higher order thinking questions, because it was like, this is great, but who will sort of, tell the cat, because agle saal se karenge, because my children are taking the board exam this year. So one part of it is this fears, as you said, and it's not just the student doing well or something. There's a capacity thing, right? So like you pointed out in your podcast, which released a couple of days ago, we are a generation, the parents of the children today are a generation which is not necessarily used to choice, right? And choice creates a different kind of stress, and not having the capacity. So for example, now vocational education, your child must, do compulsorily, and I mean, hopefully it doesn't become like a badly implemented SUP that we've been through. So my question is that now things are going to happen in two directions, right? There's going to be like a bottom-up efforts of schools, school complexes, school systems, and trying to figure this out. There are schools which have been already doing many of these things, right? There were people who were doing formative assessment the way it was supposed to be done before CCE came in. After CCE got diluted, they continue to do it, and they have not been distracted by the noise. The people who are filling forms continue to maybe have stopped filling the forms. So some of it is going to happen from the system enabling point of view. Some of it is going to happen through this discovery process. So what can individual teachers, parents, individual school managements do while the government and the states come up with these things? What can they do to implement the spirit of the NEP in a way that there is creative tension, but the emotional tension part of parents and teachers is somewhat mitigated?
So interestingly, you talk about capacity. I want to pick up on the word capacity. One is this internal journey that each of us as a teacher and a parent has to take to grow up to these new expectations. it was so easy for us to have this very efficient pathway of there is a text, here are words, here you memorize it, and then you replicate it over there. That was the lazy way and we called it achievement. I don't know why we called it achievement. Every one of us could see that there's no great achievement in being a photocopier. I mean, that's not what you want your child to grow up to be. And yet we knew as parents that this was so much easier for us than engaging with the whole growth process. Some of us were able to do it, others were not able to do it. And in fact, being able to engage with the whole growth process is a privileged place to be.
Yes.
Because as a parent yourself, you have gone through an excellent education to be able to recognize it. As a teacher, you have been taught in the best schools, or you have been trained in the best schools. Best doesn't mean richest. That is, it doesn't really have it's not completely correlated to money, but it's only the best teachers across school systems who find that they have the capacity to be able to deliver this kind of higher order value. The higher order value is reflected in the HOTS questions, of course, but higher order value is also about what we call in school systems hidden curriculum. The capacity to deliver the hidden curriculum. What is hidden curriculum? It is inculcating confidence. The fact that the three of us are sitting here and having a comfortable conversation with each other, and Sowmya, you and I have just met. How is it that we are able to connect with each other with so much comfort? That comfort comes from having, both of us having gone through a very privileged, in the sense, not rich, not money-wise, but an education that enabled us with all those hidden capacities, which cannot be tested, which are not part of the test at all. Now, how do you make that evident? How do you hold it accountable as a system? So that is a system, top-down system problem that I don't think we want to talk about today. But in the classroom and at home, what does the teacher want to do? Or what does the parent want to do? And yesterday, I introduced a concept called adjacency. Sowmya, please tell me how it fits into the theory.
Sure.
I said, as a teacher and as a parent, in the teacher role, in the co-teacher role, if you find yourself with a curious kid asking questions, and I certainly wish you that great blessing, even though a 3-year-old asking non-stop questions is something that we've all dealt with. But when they ask questions, ask them questions that are adjacent to that. A 3-year-old brings you a flower. Talk about what are the adjacent concepts to a flower and explore them with depth. You are simply following the child's interest and potential, but you are expanding it as far as possible. And keep that chain of questions. Keep that chain of questions going all the way through their education system, all the way through higher education. They talk about flowers, that means they're talking about sound, smell, texture, geography, they're talking about soil quality, anything that is adjacent to the concept of a flower. You're talking about headphones, then you are talking about connectivity, you're talking about wires, wireless chips, you're talking about marketing, you're talking about branding, you're talking about design, any adjacent concept to that. Each time you get an opportunity to have a conversation with your student, make sure that you enable adjacent concepts. And that means that each of us as a teacher and as a parent, doesn't matter what the entire mega structure is. The skill that we need to work on right now is the ability to ask good questions. That is one skill that we have to work on. And some of it is available in theory, much of it is available in teacher training, but let us also innovate more on our in ways that fit the 21st century. Just asking better questions, asking questions that enable a child in ways that progress the specific child and push them towards saying, okay, I will go and find out more. Oh, I know more than you. The minute a student comes to a teacher and says, I know more than you, that is the best moment for a teacher. The teacher is not supposed to be the boss of the classroom. The teacher is the beacon, the inspiring light. And children are like little moths coming to that light saying, I want to buzz around you. I want to bring my knowledge. See what I brought, see what I learned. And that's how we grow. I think that's the sense of excitement that we are trying to grow with this very dry document called the New Education Policy. And this is what we are hoping to encourage. This is why early years teacher training. There's so many early years establishments that do not have teacher training. have untrained teachers. Let's just build this positivity and skill set into them. So many of our teachers who know how to do this should be sharing this with the teachers who don't know how to do this. Everybody doesn't know everything. So again, peer learning platforms for teachers, hopefully organized by the government, are going to be critical, for this. I think I've answered about half your question, Vishnu.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, Meeta, I love the analogy of the, moth and the teacher who's the bright light. So the NEP does make proposes some major changes to higher education, right? In terms of multidisciplinarity, having these larger universities and doing away with these smaller ecosystems, micro ecosystems. So if you can share a little bit about how the higher education space is likely to change. After that, perhaps we can, take the audience questions and go from there. But this can be the sort of last thing we cover before we get into the questions.
So the higher education system is actually probably going to be the toughest to crack, which is why I talked less about it. And I think the higher education system is going to expose the gaps in the NEP more than anything else. And there are 3 gaps that I see where I think we have been underserved by the document. One is technology. They mention the word technology and integration with technology about 43 times. So such a long document for something that has been released during COVID, when online learning is the only major source of teaching and learning. For it to simply say, I think it sort of says we don't really understand how technology works with education, but here is chapter 23 about it, all the way at the back. So I think they're being honest in acknowledging that this is something that needs to be solved for, and they haven't solved for it yet. Who does it fall to solve for it? Well, 3 of us are talking to each other right now. It's on us, because we understand digital pedagogies or the process of creating curriculum, assessment, pedagogies, etc. And I think it falls on those of us who are able to support this new process of creating digital pedagogies. So that is one, the whole technology bit. I mean, just having an AI course out that is approved by AICTE, which is the only progress I have seen, is not digital pedagogy. That's just some curriculum in one thing that is popular right now. So there's a whole process that we need to engage with in the education sector in helping teachers. Like, for example, don't talk for more than 2.5 minutes. Go and listen to some fancy YouTubers and how chirpy they are in their online teaching and learning. Depend upon videos a lot, but not in the same boring sense that used to happen in the classroom. These are all pedagogical tools, but how do they actually work, and which ones work better than others? The second thing, and higher education, especially again, technology is going to be so much more important in higher education, because it is again teaching to the free. You don't box them into a room. In higher education, you have this ramping up and down. You can stop learning whenever you want to. You can start learning whenever you want to. Learning is going to happen in multidisciplinary campuses, which means that if you are a mathematics student and you want to walk into a philosophy class and listen in for a while, you should just be able to stroll across to another building and sit down. And maybe if you want to learn mathematics and philosophy together, you should be able to construct that approach. And these multiple lenses are absolutely critical for constructing our future. We need that. Totally with that in theory, totally with that in sheer desperation to get our future right. Otherwise, we're all going to be under the thumb of some stupid, badly designed algorithm. So we really don't want that. Our survival depends upon this multidisciplinarity. But then who is going to guide the students to saying this is how you will actually be able to follow through? Class 9 onwards, and especially in higher education, the transitions and your ability to pull it all together. Because of course, these are young 20, 18, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They want to be everywhere at the same time. They're little magpies. This is shiny, I will go there. And bless them, let them go and explore everything. But ultimately, they have to find their own potential, their own passion. They have to find themselves at a certain degree of mastery of knowledge, where they can create value with that knowledge. I'm not saying earn money only, but they have to be able to create value with that knowledge. And who's going to help them with that transition? That is a gap that is left in the NEP, those transitions and the pastoral care that higher education needs. So again, higher education, it's going to be chaotic for a while, but not that chaotic, because globally, this step on, step off, the choice system, the multidisciplinarity, etc., has already been delivered in so many university systems. In fact, I'm going to take one step further. So we can copy from them, we can learn from them. Technology transfer is not a new thing in India. We've been doing it for decades. We're very good at receiving technology and processes from others and improving them in our context. We're very good at that. But what we haven't found consensus on right now is scaling up, because other countries manage to do that with much smaller populations. And our need, and this comes to the second definition of your word, capacity. Higher education capacity is just not enough for our needs, which means our IITs, instead of speaking to a few thousand students, should be speaking to tens of thousands of students each. But that scaling up is a very, very scary thing, both for IITs, both for mastery of subjects, and this extends all the way across higher education. So do we want to include scaling up, which again, the NEP has a target, the gross enrollment ratio should be up to this much, 35% by this year, 50% by this year, etc. They have targets for that. So are we in a position to enable both the multidisciplinarity, the modularity, and the scaling up at the same time? Are we going to be able to pull that off? Is a challenge that the NEP has thrown to the higher education sector. And I think this is a great challenge to take up. But let us expect regular changes as parents and teachers. Let us expect regular changes, phased changes, pretty much for the next 15 years.
Yeah, that's one last question before we go to the others. It's related to this. So the way I see it is that you cannot reform higher education without reforming, the school thing and the other way around, right? Because one is placing a demand on the other, one is preparing a group of students. Now I'm also trying to change the children to students to the other thing. So the NEP talks about some very interesting things. For example, I think you've been in Delhi University and you know the cutoff of Stephens being 99.5% or whatever it is.
My college had 100% 1 year.
100%.
Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. So it's absurd, right? And the NEP does talk about system which has the portfolio of every child through school. It talks about a holistic report card. It hints somewhere, I've not read it as carefully, of course, as many times as you've read it. It hints somewhere about college admissions being based on not just even the new aptitude test of NTA, but also some of these other things. So is that going to change? Is the NEP really talking about a change in, the pathway to college admission?
So I'm actually quite excited about this bit. Even though it's not been written explicitly in the NEP, I think they're trying to hide it under lots of language, because they know that there's going to be a lot of opposition to it. And early opposition could kill that idea. I mean, there are committees and committees and committees and committees, and you know how a great idea filters through committees and ends up being almost nothing. So there is the danger of all of that happening. But I think there's a very beautiful gem in this NEP, where they are finally talking about aligning all the boards. Yes. And they will be doing that via the exam after the voluntary one right now. It's in quotes in the NEP. And the voluntary exam slowly will become compulsory. And that one exam that is taken by students across all boards, hopefully they'll be able to persuade boards to adapt that exam in addition to the class 12 exam. And that exam actually gives us statistical information on the calibration of the boards.
Correct.
That is we have had no data. We have had no statistical spine to be able to say. And then SRCC students are shouting, Tamil Nadu board gives so many marks for free and our Delhi board doesn't give this. And there's no way of doing that. We've had 3-4 years of negotiations at the MHRD level, where all state boards were brought together and everybody said, yes, yes, we will not do marks adjustment anymore. And of course, how do you even know what is happening till you have data? So this one single exam that will stand between school and college actually should give us that kind of data. Also, the nature of that exam, the kind of questions they ask, the weightage they do, the kind of high stakes or low stakes that they make this exam. So it's in combination with a lot of formative assessments, for example, or it is in combination with a lot of 360-degree evaluation of the child. So that exam itself is not high stakes. If you manage that really well, that can be the balancing factor between school and college. It gives information to the school system that we want this kind of critical thinking. We want collaborative working. We want students who are able to show at least one bright spike in something, they can be average in others. Do you have some sort of philosophical or musical or some sort of thinking ability that doesn't necessarily get shown in marks and numbers? That exam and the way they use that exam can actually create that perfect filter while being statistically rigorous. I have high hopes of this one. If managed well, I have a great deal of fear because this is a fairly complex concept. You have worked with governments. You know it is a fairly complex concept, and maybe even if it takes 10, 12 years to slowly, hiding under the radar, get in place. I think we would be blessed in 10 years to have that evenness between schools and colleges, where colleges then don't have to say our students were underprepared. And schools don't say that, no, you should be doing that at college. I mean, it's a mess right now.
Oh, I agree. I mean, though we vilify assessments is perhaps the only thing which can align all the players in across, school and higher education.
Oh, we don't vilify assessments. They just scare us so much.
Not you, but yeah. But
none of us like being judged. Each of us hates being judged. Yeah. And think of all the teachers who are teaching online because they're being watched by everybody. That's half the stress, right? So we don't, and that maybe that's why we need to assess, but we believe in them. If assessments are our God, if marks are our money in the classroom space, then we have to transact in that.
Yeah, I have another question, but I'm going to ask my question later if there is time. Otherwise, I'll call you and ask that question. So, Sowmya, if you can maybe choose a couple of questions which people have typed in and read out, we can address those, and then people can actually, after that, switch on their camera and ask questions. Yeah. We have about 2 minutes left, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, let me just... there is one, for example, that says with this NEP, the continuous... assessment, CCE will be more important. Assessments need to be direct, indirect and subtle, especially for primary and pre-primary. How would that work? What are your thoughts? Because that's not so obvious, I guess, for the younger ages.
No, it's not obvious. And two things are happening. One is that they're requesting exams. I shouldn't say mandating. For class 3, 5, 8, and I think there's one more class. But those are for the schools, and individual student marks are not going to be shared at all, So I think indirect and subtle includes this very important component of this is not about the individual competition of a child at such a young age. At that age, they need to be more collaborative anyway. And when you grow up, I mean, to be honest, I do not understand this intense competition in the Indian education system. Because when you grow up and you go to work, you work in teams anyway. So the team success is your success. And if you're that one guy in that team who's hugely successful and the rest of your team is not successful, then I'm sorry, you're not a good person at all. And it's not sustainable. It's just not going to work. Even in collaboration, sharing, these assessments need to be in place. Yes, CCE as such is not going to be there. What they have is a holistic report card, because I think what they realized in the CCE experiment, and sadly one has to call it an experiment, is that teachers and groups of teachers were not very comfortable in creating their own report card. That was a burden one step too far for teachers, given their current training, resources, capacity, time, pressures on everything. They could not create that holistic one. So in this case, the holistic report card, the format template of that, I think is going to be given out by the states. So you are able to assess the students in different ways and continuously again. Continuous informative thing. So again, nothing is an act of judgment. It is all subtle. It is definitely indirect. It is about student well-being. Having said that, I want to also flag one problem that I see. It's something that terrifies me. And they're saying they're going to, for every student in the country, they're going to track their performance all the way from nursery to higher education using AI. And why would one want to use AI unless it is for some, and what would you base your AI on? You have no data anyway. So what is this intelligence happening? What is this machine learning happening? What are you basing it on your prejudices? How are you designing those algorithms? And why are you even tracking? I mean, you use AI as a predictor. So what are you predicting? Are you predicting that this person can only do this and not do that? All our children blossom at different ages. So what is this tracking and AI going to do, and why should it be there? It's very intrusive. And I'm not comfortable with that approach at all. I don't understand how it fits in with the current scenario. I can see the negatives. I can't see the positives here. So I think this is something that we need to, as educators, question and flag and try to understand better.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'll reserve my comment because there are a few questions waiting. Yeah, this is from a different angle for teacher education. In the context of teacher education, is the NTA a task to set up a framework to enrich differential teacher quality, given how diverse the quality is now? Or will it set up guidelines and leave it to the states to set up the expectations and the standards for implementation?
So Meeta, when you're responding to that, there is another question which is talking about the role of the NTA itself. What is the role and what will happen to stakeholders in Kerala, Tamil Nadu versus those in Bihar, Chhattisgarh? So perhaps if you can speak a bit about the NTA, what is perhaps the goal behind the NTA and what kind of things will happen?
Yeah. It's early days yet. So one can't be very precise in one's predictions. These are only predictions. But I have a very easy job today because we are only talking about policy. And we are not talking necessarily about practice. We are saying this is how it may happen in practice. This is how it is likely to happen in practice. And these are the things that we can do right now to attain the main vision. And so that makes it very easy for me. The national education policy has been so well written. I'm not talking about language and level, etc. That's different. It's not a piece of literature. But everything that is right and good has been written into it. So we are saying that our teachers need support, the NEP will say our teachers need support. We say the context of teaching and learning matters, the NEP says that. Everything that you want to hear in an ideal situation, the NEP has said everything of that sort. So, any concerns that you have, if you go and look at the language of the NEP, they will say, yes, we are going to do that. Now the National Testing Agency, it hasn't actually said it will align all the boards. It has said it will attempt to do that. Aligning boards does not mean that they will have the same standards. It does not mean that the boards will have the same quality. It means that we will understand that this board is testing this and that board is testing that, and the levels of that are connected to each other this way. So it's establishing standards, and they can all have, in fact, I'm strongly in favor of many, many more boards, even private examination boards with their own standards, because every board gives another set of students a chance to succeed. So, but as long as you know what standard it is operating at, that is important. So standardization is a different thing where everybody is doing the same cookie cutter thing. We do not want a cookie cutter country. We cannot have a cookie cutter country. Cookie cutter countries are, forget about the politics of it and everything. If we think about the students, if I were to be asked to perform in the arts, for example, I would be a desperate failure. You have a guitar behind you. If I were to ask to strum a guitar, I would never be able to achieve anything in life. It's just impossible for me. So if the cookie cutter doesn't fit me, then how am I going to progress? So I think this is a fear that we should not have. We are a very diverse set of people just because of our sheer size. And we will, while we understand standards, we understand that this means mastery, this means excellence. That doesn't mean that everybody has to have excellence in the same thing in the same way. We can't, that will just be rote learning again. We can't go back to that. That is our fight. That is our fight, and I think that's a personal fight for each one of us at this stage.
A quick comment on Meeta, what you said. I think what you're saying is fantastic, right? That a multiplicity of boards, some understanding of how they relate to each other. So the board is actually an empowering thing in the way you are presenting it, right? But in India, we've not looked at the board like that. The board is the, big bad person who's judging you, right? In our case. And my sense, and I don't know a lot about this, but my sense is perhaps the NTA's immediate goals are more to do with hopefully coming up with a kind of an assessment that reduces the dependence on coaching. I mean, this is a $1 million question, right? Can an assessment, a high stakes assessment, such as the SAT or the IIT JEE or whatever, can it really remain ahead of the coaching curve, and can it, sort of, I mean, I don't know if you'll get into that.
Tell me how. I've had this discussion before, and because you spend so much time in the assessment space, I'm going to throw the question back to you. How will it reduce coaching? In fact, there are 2 places in the NEP where they say the regulatory purpose of the NEP is to reduce commercialization. I must say the NEP has treated the private sector rather like a stepchild, and I'm a little bit upset about that. Because the private sector, as individuals, as NGOs, as civil sector organizations, as technocratic organizations, as GenWise itself, we're all doing the best we can to help our children reach their potential. And in fact, you have to admit that the much of excellence, experimentation, innovation, all the things we're saying we're good teachers who look at the NEP and say we've already done it before, has come from the private sector. So I think the private sector should not be defined. Coming back to your coaching thing, there is a problem in coaching as there is a problem in teaching and learning. But tell me, how will the National Testing Agency and its very excellent exams that it has started and will continue to develop, how will it reduce coaching? I don't see the how.
So I don't think it will necessarily reduce coaching, but I think it's possible for an assessment or a common aptitude test of the NTA, something like that, to sort of keep innovating in terms of how the assessment is, which makes it harder for the coaching industry to teach certain patterns which you mug up and come. So what I think might happen is the coaching industry might itself. So if you're teaching to a good test, right? Then
it comes back to the question. It comes back to the nature of the question. And this is where our only reform, if we want to reduce it to, the tons of carbon and put it under huge amounts of pressure and you come up with a diamond. The diamond in all of this is the question.
I agree.
It comes back to this, because if you ask good questions, coaching centers themselves will have to teach well. And then what's wrong with one private center teaching well versus a public center teaching well? We just want teaching well.
So don't worry about breaking the coaching industry. Just make sure that your questions are very good, and the only way to crack those questions is to really learn. Right?
And why crack them? Crack was terminology that we used for pattern matching. In fact, going back to my cat, I remember telling myself that my job was to shift the functions of the brain to the spine, because the spine reacts faster to patterns. It's about speed, etc. I mean, that was my goal. That was the personal goal that I set, and it worked at that time. But that's not learning. That is an excellent mountain, I must say, going back to your quotation.
Definitely. No, the only problem is if that becomes the only way to learn. You see, that is the problem, because I think that is also an important skill for youngsters. I think, who are in the prime of their youth and life and everything, all their faculties. It is important to be able to work under some pressure and to perform and to push yourself, with motivation from within, whatever the cause may be. The motivation from within may be that, it can be
Can you hear Sowmya, Meeta?
I couldn't for a minute, but I thought it was my connection.
Multiple things, and I won't get into that. So, okay, is it okay now? I'm sorry, I had no indication.
For the last 10-20 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying, I think it's important for young people to be able to put themselves under some kind of pressure. I do believe in that, actually. Because you are in the prime of your youth, all your faculties are at their peak, and it's important to put it to some test and contribute in some way. But I know that that's a double-edged sword. It can easily go down a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I think the point is we've gone too much that way, right? It's
exactly.
Never taken a high.
Too many of us have been forced that way. Too many of us have been forced that way. Yeah. If it's a choice, that's okay. If it's a go, as your mountain. If it's a mountain that I want to climb, then that's fine.
Yes.
Nobody should be pushing me towards that mountain.
Exactly.
I refuse to climb the guitar mountain, for example. I'm not going to do that. And I think that confidence, that comfort with what we are good at and what we are not so good at is not an easy realization when you're 16 or 17.
Yeah.
Because it's not failure. It's not failure when you can't draw really well or create a great piece of art. It's not failure if you can't do math really well. But somebody has to be there to help you acknowledge that you have reached mastery in that.
Yes.
And you have not reached mastery in something else. And in philosophy, for example, it's okay to reach mastery when you're 60 years old. There's no rush. And that, again, coming back to the NEP, is another big lack, because lifelong education has been relegated to saying English literacy, this is for people who didn't make it, for the losers in life. They don't say losers in life, of course, they use beautiful language. But lifelong learning is literally for people like all of us in this conversation, and in the audience as well, people on asking questions. Because what are we doing right now? We're engaging in an act of lifelong learning in a slightly unstructured manner. But for us to be able to go onto Duolingo and learn a new language, to engage with philosophers and teachers, that enriches our lives and makes us choose better for our work and for our livelihoods as well. Sure. So there is a lot but the thing is, it's up to us. So for this NEP, I have 3 words really. It's like choice, chance, challenge. I talked about choice and chance at the beginning. The third is challenge, because it simply throws the challenge to us as students and as educators and say, show me how you can do it.
Yeah. So Sowmya, I think
there is just one more question, Vishnu, if we have time.
Yeah, there are a couple of other questions, and we have time. We have 7-8 minutes.
Yeah.
So maybe we can just take Selvaraju's thing, because it is related to the NTA coaching. He's just responded.
Yeah.
The flow.
Right to the bottom.
I can just read it out and share.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So what Selvaraju is saying, and he and Radha had asked questions about the NTA, and we talked about this and coaching. So he's made a comment that if coaching centers are fine, why a parallel system? Why can't it be part of the school? And why should students have to go, to the formal school as well as this? And my quick comment on that is, yes, it is a burden for students and parents. I think if the school is doing what it is doing well, and you should be able to, in fact, do well in that entrance examination or NTA's common aptitude test without the need for too much coaching. But the reality, what is going to happen is that parents, I think, and children will continue to have choice, and choice is not necessarily a bad thing. I think, so what I mean by that is, there will be always some people who will, say that, oh, but I will go to that really, really great teacher. And that great teacher is not sort of, maybe available to coach in whatever system you are. And maybe that person charges higher rates and you go to that. I don't think we can do away with it, or we should do away with it. What we should do, however, is to provide very high quality teaching, coaching, whatever you call it, within the formal school system without having to spend a ton of money, so that this kind of thing is relegated to the margins. But see, you cannot mandate this again. If you start saying that there will be no coaching and this thing should happen, that doesn't make sense. The best way is to show that you can do a quality job. And actually, there are thousands, lakhs of extremely capable government school teachers who can do this. It's a question of enabling them, right?
And motivating them and supporting them.
Yeah.
And you can't get away. There's the equity question. The equity question is the big question over here, because it's only rich schools, and many schools did that. They attached coaching centers to them. They had tie-ups. And as far as I can remember, that was by regulation, they were told not to have those tie-ups. So I still see some schools around with boards saying that we have tied up with XYZ coaching center. But I also know of other schools that received circulars saying you cannot do this. You cannot have extra coaching in school, because that means that it is not a level playing field. And the schooling system is ultimately supposed to provide a level playing field. If you look at it from the equity perspective and equal opportunities perspective, which is a major goal of these competitive exams and therefore of the NTA, then you cannot get away from the fact that you're absolutely right. Nothing can substitute for improving core teaching in the regular schools. You have to improve that. And if you're if competitive outside coaching, it acts as a competition to these schools and spurs them to do better, great. But we haven't seen that in practice. We haven't seen that at all. In fact, the opposite has happened, where you seed all your teaching and learning, that of course you learn it in your tuition and of course you learn it in your coaching class. Right. So I don't know how to reverse that flow. And until that flow is reversed, the coaching class will retain primacy, because it's an effect, it's a very happy, I will teach less, you will make more money kind of system, right? It's a beautiful system in equilibrium right now. Everybody is happy with the system. But everybody is happy with the system if you have the money to pay for it.
Yeah. That's right.
That is a big if. So let's not forget those who do not have the money to pay for it and deserve this opportunity to make whatever they want to choose their mountain.
Yeah, and also I think another thing is, one price we pay is money, the other price is the children. I think their stress levels are moved into this, from the creative tension, it moves very much into the emotional tension that Vishnu had mentioned. So many of them in these institutes are quite, they're completely racked by nerves, and they're like completely frazzled and fragmented, and you wonder what they're going to make of themselves in the next 10-15 years. So that's another price to pay. So.
Exactly. And I mean, in a way, I have to admit, maybe it's not politic to say that, but this is greed. This slips from aspiration and ambition to greed.
Correct.
And therefore it becomes, to use a Hindi word or Sanskrit word, very vakra. This is the wrong way of, it's just gone too far, and then it has become corrupted.
Yes.
Excellence itself, if pushed too far, finds its corrupt form. And I think this is where we have to pull back. Not fighting commercialization, but we have to pull back from saying this is a sensible and healthy space to remain. Let us remain within this globe. How? It depends upon each teacher and each parent.
Vishnu, are you there? Yeah, okay. I was not sure whether you're frozen. Yeah.
I'm not able to see your video for some reason. Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'll figure it out, but there are a couple of questions. If you can just pose those, we can answer those and end the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. There is a comment from Radha that says equity in both access for students to quality education and access for teachers to quality education is a real mountain. Yes, that the implementation will have to scale. Like Meeta mentioned, we are only dealing with the policy now, so we will not get into the question marks on the implementation.
But we have to agree with her.
Yes.
And I would like to extend the question, adjacency principle. The next question, let's just at least ask the question, who does this? Who does this implementation to make sure that this mountain is chosen? Is it us, the teachers? Is it us, the teacher training support system? Is it us who work with students? Or is it some anonymous government that doesn't even understand more than administration? There are experts out there, of course. I will admit that there's some wonderful people there.
Yeah, there is.
I'm just raising the question.
Sorry, Meeta, I didn't get that.
Sorry, I said I'm just raising the question.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, absolutely. The one last small question is, don't you think parents have outsourced their role? From Vivek, who's Regular.
Brilliant question, no? Such a brilliant question. Do you think parents have outsourced their role? Counter question to that is, do you think that teachers have outsourced their role? Where is that line between parenting and teaching when it comes to our children as students? Because one thing we realize is when we send our children to school, we say that the teachers there are in loco parentis. They are there in the place of parents to make, but for what, right? To make sure that the children are safe,
Right.
to make sure that they are progressing, to make sure that they're healthy, to make sure that nothing wrong happens to the child. But are they in loco parentis in their professional role as teachers? No, that's a separate role for teachers. That professionally, our job is to progress your children, our students, your children, our students, in a systematic manner, so much faster and aligned with whatever learning we have from previous education theory, evidence, learning from other teachers. We have 300 years of learning history behind us that has been recorded really well, and much more even before that. And so we bring our expertise to the table as professional teachers. So that there is, in a way, a Venn diagram that forms the role of parents and the role of teachers. And each of them has to make sure that they do their part completely. Now, when it comes to online learning during the crisis, we have seen the opposite happen. In fact, even the NEP talks about parents as co-teachers. Now, I do not know any wonderful teacher who is looking forward to that. Because parents, when they have way too much pressure in the school system, think of every PTA. When then the obsession with marks. Why did my child get 9.5 and not get 10 on 10 in this? That's the kind of questions they ask in PTAs. Whereas the questions that parents should be asking about, how is my child progressing? Is the child able to collaborate in class? Is the child able to engage in all the activities, or is there something that they are demonstrating a potential for? I mean, you should be asking those questions. What difference does marks make? So when parents take on the role of co-teachers, reversing this question, I think we need to have a discussion about that, where that role starts and where it stops. You have to be there as a support system. The triad has to work together. Parent, teacher, student. We need all three in the system. But your job as a parent is to be supportive, not to provide the answers as we have heard in the online training system. Not to be your student's assistants. Because your student is actually, I mean, your child is learning how to upload those things. Those are physical skills required for the workspace. Don't do it for them. So there is a discussion to be had over there.
Thanks. I think that was a great question and a great answer. There are a few people whose questions have not been answered. Sowmya, maybe you can just save that file and we will write to the response.
Yeah, I have.
I think we'll close here, and I just want to say a couple of things to end this. So what I think one of the things Meeta has been saying is that it's sort of a challenge thrown to us, whether it is the bureaucrat or the school management or the teacher or the parent. Now the activist parent or the teacher has always been trying to do these kind of things to the best of their abilities, to the amount they had access, whether in a metro city somewhere. They have tried to ask the right kind of questions, give the space for creativity, critical thinking, make choice available to the extent as possible. In fact, time does not permit, otherwise Meeta would have told us that many of these things already exist in a sense. For example,
that discussion.
Yeah, that's a different discussion. So the reason I'm sharing this is that I think what the NEP has done well is to sort of legitimize the view which many sort of enlightened parents and teachers had already taken and they were trying to do. So now it's legitimate to do certain things, and that's a huge thing, because now at least even if the system takes a bit of time to change, that's what is the official stance. So I would say that for parents and teachers, do not wait till things are thrust on you. It may go a little slower or faster, but in your own interest, in the interest of the students and the children and everybody, I think it makes sense to start making change in whatever small ways we can, working towards this. I think schools were invited to give implementation suggestions by August 31st. I'm sure you can still send suggestions. So any last words, Meeta, before we close this?
I think we've said a lot. I think thank you for reminding me that much of what needs to be achieved has already been achieved in the best of places. So I would go back to my original value that I hold very dear, that anything that we do in the education sector can be done well only if we have a spirit of giving and sharing. And it is only when we share our best practices, our experiences, where we went wrong, and how we can do it better, that all of us will be able to pull together in the same direction. So already, you know, the whole marks thing and the ideal learning thing is beginning to align. It can only get better, and it can only happen if we learn how to share.
I think those are wise words.
Note on which to end this session. So thanks to all the participants on Zoom and Facebook Live, and to Meeta. You can follow Meeta on Twitter. She's very active there, and you can pose your questions directly also there. Thanks so much, Meeta. And we will end this here. Meeta, just stay on. We will